Well, welcome into this special edition, I guess we'll call it, of Making the Leap, our year in review. This is the second year we've now done kind of a retrospective. The next couple of episodes of this podcast will be highlights, some of our favorite moments of 2023.
Yeah, I think just kind of giving that overview of what we do here with the podcast, because I think I was just asked to say, like, someone wanted a very brief, what is the podcast about? And I feel like now we're branching out into a lot of different arenas. And so it's hard to, encapsulate all the time in just one thing. And so I think these are great episodes to just kind of show, we've got homeschool, we've got kingdom education, we've got policy discussions, we've got, just certain, I guess, an overview. So I really like doing episodes like this to showcase some of the things we've done.
I was reminded that coming up in 2024, we will hit our 100th episode. So we've got to figure out something special.
We are coming close to that. Yep.
Episode 100. But in the meantime, yes, to your point, we've done quite a few shows now already, 80 some of them. And we want to always remind you that if you haven't listened to the entire catalog of shows, we hope that you will. We think they're pretty timeless. We think most of them hold up pretty well and may be useful to you, subjects that maybe you missed or haven't heard before. So that's the point of the next couple of shows, is to give you a little taste of some of the shows you may not have missed if you're newer. And for those of you that have listened all along, some highlights of shows that we've enjoyed. So we start today with a gentleman called Luke Bauer with Kingdom Education Ministries. And what Luke lays out in this episode, I think, most importantly, is how critically important, if you're talking about kingdom education, what is that by definition? Not just Christian school, but what is kingdom education, and how does it work between school and home? Take a listen.
Simply put, to me, and what Dr. Schultz says makes so much sense in the terminology of kingdom education. Kingdom, when you think of a kingdom, there is a king that has a reign. And so the word Christian now is so, I don't want to say overused, but maybe watered down, and everybody in the United States says they're a Christian. The King, Christ, God our Father, Lord Jesus Christ, that king and the reign in young people's lives and the lives of leadership and school board members, that is what we're after in kingdom education. That God would reign in the educational process, not just in a 8-hour school day, but in the educational process in the home. Mom and dad would be committed in their relationship with Christ. In the church, that pastors and lay leaders and members would be committed to Christ as king. And so when you have that three-legged stool of the home, church, and school, where Christ is reigning, then as we do educate the next generation, Christ reigns in their lives. That's how you transform the culture.
I really, you and I were talking about these episodes and which ones to choose. I wanted to include that specific piece because I do think that keeping that picture in mind of church supporting schools, supporting home, and it's almost interchangeable pieces, I really think that's important. I think there's a lot of value for parents to go back and really do some, if you are moving your child and you're thinking of putting them into a Christian education setting, somebody like Luke, something like Kingdom Education Ministries, doing that learning that for some cases it's just plain start from scratch teaching.
Well, they keep the focus on the thing.
They really do, and you have to go ahead and kind of build that knowledge base. And I think that's an important thing. That idea of God reigning, not just for us, not just for our kids, but what's coming next. That next generation is crucial. So I definitely would encourage people to take a listen to that episode.
Yeah, it defines kingdom education. I think probably the best episode that defines, if you've ever been asked or you've heard the term kingdom education, I think that episode probably best describes it. And as we focused on so often on this show, Christian education, that kind of generic term, whether that's homeschool or a micro school or a Christian school 5 days a week, that probably is too broad. As he said, it's kind of almost... You don't want to say generic, but it is.
And not every school is a kingdom education school, so that's important to note.
Right.
I actually had this conversation with Anna just the other day with our daughter, that is just a piece to know what are you looking to get out of for your child's education, and this is a piece. But because it weaves itself through so many episodes that we do, I really felt strongly that is something that it just gives parents something to think about.
Our next highlight of 2023 comes from a woman called Carla Kravickas. Carla hails from the state of Arizona, which is ground zero for the school choice phenomenon that has now exploded, I think, to like 10 states total. But it all started in Arizona.
It really did. And she's a great one for people to listen to go back, because this idea that everything has to be redone to include special education, or that special education services cannot be offered within small startup schools, that that there's all these stumbling blocks. She did a lot to dismantle that, and she gave you and I both a lot to think about.
Yes.
So if you just take a listen to this.
This is really important, because so many people that are trying to start their own school out there, Carla, this is really important, because this is the question we always get, and I still don't feel like I've answered it effectively, at least to my mind. I'm starting a little school, and I've got 10 students, and one of them has, I don't know, ADD, or maybe
dyslexia,
or four of them do. I don't know. Can we start this little school without having a special ed instructor who pulls that student or 2 or 3 students aside and specially educates them all day? Am I capable, my staff of 2 or 3 in my startup school, to teach all 10 of these kids, regardless of their needs?
With the example that you're giving, I would say yes, but I don't want to make a blanket statement for any child with a disability, because there's such a huge, but I think it's that huge swath that we lose sight of. Because again, we think of the ones that are in our heads. We don't even always want to say them out loud or admit it, right? We have these preconceived notions of who they are, but they really, 70% of them, you don't even realize they're there. They're already in every classroom, often undiagnosed and often just struggling.
Sure.
I think oftentimes, I live in Arizona, where we have, hundreds of charter schools, which is kind of the same phenomenon. They're starting new schools. Often they start with, okay, what do we want to teach, and how do we want to teach differently, than rather starting with the student first.
Sure.
And that's why I think faith-based education is such a beautiful paradigm to have a different conversation, because hopefully we're all approaching the conversation that God makes no mistakes. Every child is perfectly designed. So if you start with that premise, that the conversation should be different, honestly, than even in a public school environment, because you're able to have a conversation in a different way.
I think the one that stood out, the comment that has stood out since then, and that was an episode back from August, the idea that every child is designed perfectly by God. So we have to remember that as educators, as parents, when you're talking about being a startup school, that these are not, they're not problems to be fixed. They are coming to you. They are coming to us as parents with these unique abilities and talents. And that if every child is designed by God, then by that same reasoning, every child can be taught and every child can be included.
Yeah.
And she really got into the heart of it, that we don't have to revamp everything to go ahead and help.
Yeah, her show was pretty convicting, as I recall it, because it was the first time that she'd ever really sort of approached the subject of special education or a special needs kid, and kind of reframing your brain about how you incorporate them into the learning environment. I had never thought of it, I'll just say. And I suspect if you didn't hear this episode, you will have your brain kind of rewired as to how you think about special education.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Coming up next, this third clip from 2023 is from a woman called Kristen Walls. This was back in April. We talked with her. We met her through your sister.
Yes. So I was there talking with their group. They have a homeschool group, and they're big proponents within that group of what's called Wild and Free, which is kind of its own movement in and of itself.
This is in the Chicagoland area.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And these are primarily women, not exclusively. I think there's one dad in the group.
All the parents are involved regardless. The moms are the ones that do a lot of the planning, but I've seen a lot of what they do, and there's dads, and they're building sets for plays, they're helping with the outdoor education piece of things, they're camping, they're doing all kinds of things. So the dads are involved, but this is primarily, when I was around them, it's a lot of moms coming together.
Yeah, so this is yet another approach to rethinking the way you educate your kids with Kristen. Take a listen.
We live about 45 minutes outside of Chicago. I have 3 boys. They are 9, 7, and 4. And we had no plans to homeschool. This kind of snuck up on us. I had sent my oldest son to preschool starting when he was 2. So I was not one of those moms who was, kind of didn't want to let my child go to school too early. He was at preschool. So things were going fine at preschool until he was inching closer to kindergarten. And then I just started having these little nagging feelings. And in hindsight, it felt like God was kind of nudging me towards homeschooling. The first thing that started nagging me was I felt like they were really pushing academics really hard, even prior to kindergarten. They were trying to get the kids to read before they went to kindergarten, which just to me seemed so early because when I was in school, you didn't learn to read till you were in first grade.
Right.
And so it just seemed like too much too soon. He was coming home with worksheets to do for homework, which I thought was too much for somebody in pre-K. It was just, it seemed too academic, too much pressure. And then the other thing that started nagging at me was it was a half-day program, and so I would send my son in the mornings. And when he would come back, he would just have an hour or two where his emotions were just all over the place.
Okay.
He had to decompress after holding it together at school all day and trying to keep his, he's an active boy, so trying to keep his body calm and his emotions calm, and he would come home and just explode. And I felt like I was getting the worst of my son, and when he was at school, the teachers were getting the best of him, and that bothered me.
Sure.
And so again, just kind of a nagging feeling.
Okay.
Was
and
it
then the straw that broke the camel's...
I'm sorry to interrupt,
go
but
ahead.
was it the structure of the day that was causing your son such distress?
I think it was the fact that he was in such a controlled environment where he had to behave a certain way and not be active. He's a very physically active boy and kind of had to hold it together and hold his emotions in. And as a young kid, I just felt like that was too much for him.
Yeah.
When he came home, he just kind of exploded.
And so then when you said the
then-
straw that kind of broke the camel's back, what was that piece?
Yep. Okay, so for us, and I know every family has different feelings on technology for young kids.
Right.
And our family, we're very low tech, especially when the kids were younger. We just didn't do any screens. And I found out that in our public school district, and we had all intentions of sending our oldest to public school, they hand out iPads to every student in kindergarten, and that is their iPad to take home. And this bothered me, not only because they were putting iPads, using them for academic purposes, even when, we know for young kids, that's not good for their brain at such a young age. But I also felt like it was kind of usurping my authority as a parent, because they would then bring this technology home and say, well, I have to do this for school. It's, and I would say, well, I don't want that in the house. And it's almost like the schools were making that decision for me.
Right.
And I didn't feel comfortable with that. And so at that time, that's when we started kind of researching alternative education.
Okay.
And concurrently, I just kept having these strange run-ins at random places like an airport where I would meet homeschooling families. And I didn't know any homeschooling families personally in our community or otherwise. And I just kept running into these families with these amazing kids. And I would get chatting with a mom, and she would say, oh, we homeschool. And I was like, really? And that just kind of got the wheels turning that there was an option out there, and really amazing kids, and they seem like they're doing really well and thriving. And I kind of said to my husband, why don't we think about homeschooling?
This is one too, I felt, as we talked about these, to include it because learning obviously doesn't have to happen within just a classroom. So this homeschooling idea, and she really, as you heard in that clip, listening to those nudges, that was the part that jumped out at me, because from there has launched this entire group of women. And it was because she was just not feeling good about her children sitting in school, and even just in that kindergarten mode of coming home and tired and needing to decompress and overwhelmed and overstimulated, and saying, this isn't what I want. This isn't right for our family. It was too intense. And so she really listened to that piece. And I think for parents in general, we know 99% of the time when something just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, and you'll note that
You know?
in that episode, if memory serves, she didn't. She has young kids, very young kids, but she did not commit long term. I said, "Is this
Right.
something you think you'll do through senior high?" And she said, "I don't know."
Yeah.
And that was, I think, one of the most inspirational points of that particular conversation was this was a mom who said, "Right now, for this stage in our lives, this makes sense and this works. We'll cross that next bridge when we get to it."
And this is something that I know that I don't even think I've shared with you since that. So that was over a year ago that I met her. A lot of those moms have come together and they've formed basically a co-op where they are now taking education. It's not just about being outside. They're and doing all the outside activities. They have formed a group to start supplementing educationally for their little groups and their big groups, and they're primarily boys. They have some girls, but a lot of boys. And I mean, they're out there doing PE activities, they're doing science, they're doing all these things together. And so they have started expanding. So I'm sure she is still considering that, but for where she is now, I love seeing that take place.
Yeah, your sister sends us pictures from their group all the time, and these kids are always doing the most interesting things. They're making sets, or they're playing in creeks, or they're at some.
I know they're traveling up to a museum,
Yeah.
and they meet the author, and they're just. But it's learning at its.
Our young
best.
nephews are getting an education that is entirely different than our kids got
Yes.
and we got. So
It's
I'll be
Anna.
interested to watch
She'll
them.
get these videos. We'll watch them, and she'll just say, "They have the best childhood."
Yeah.
They're having the best childhood.
Yeah, if
Mom.
we were to do it all over again, your sister.
I
my
know. I just
sister-in-law.
kind of shrug. I'm like, sorry. I'll do my best.
So our next clip from 2023 comes from our friend Jenny Gentles. We've had her on the show a couple of times. Jenny's a smart lady. She comes out of the Washington, D.C. area, Virginia area, and one of the things Jenny focuses on with her own podcast is educating folks about things like educational savings accounts. And how you can take advantage of it, tap into it. A lot of people may not even understand what those are and if they're available to you in your state. So here's a little bit of that conversation with Jenny.
A new podcast that will be produced by the Independent Women's Forum came from, and we launched it in January during National School Choice Week, and we're calling it Students Over Systems. So I hope you approve of that title.
Perfect.
I do love that name because I think that is actually what is at the heart of what the school choice movement is when we're talking about focusing on the individual student and not this giant big system that everybody feeds into. I loved the name when I came across it because when we have these conversations with people, there's a lot of arguments and a lot of emotion and a lot of feeling that all gets wrapped up into it. But really, we are talking about what individual kids need, and they don't all need the same thing. Each state doesn't need the same thing. Each community doesn't need the same thing. So I thought it was a perfect way to title things to really get to the heart of what you're doing.
And man, Jenny, the thing about it is, even since you've launched this podcast, even since we last talked, there are like these 4 states that have now passed universal school choice. I mean, this snowball is picking up speed. It's rolling downhill. You get that feeling?
Absolutely. I'm really encouraged by the momentum that the education freedom movement has right now and the new kind of reckoning that we've had. During the COVID era, it was so clear that systems were the priority and that adults were put at the center of every K-12 education decision. And we realized the great harm that inflicted upon the children and the students who should be absolutely at everybody's front of mind and absolutely should be the priority. And so we're seeing a reckoning. We're seeing a switch from that systems over students mentality, and that momentum started in 2021. We were calling that the year of school choice. Close to 20 states created and expanded school choice programs. Last year, 2022, Arizona created a universal eligibility for their existing Empowerment Scholarship Account, ESA program. And then, as you said, Chris, already this year in January, right out the gate, 2 states, Iowa and Utah, have already passed bills creating broadly eligible school choice programs, again, ESAs, education savings accounts. So that momentum has been underway since we all realized in the heart of COVID, this is wrong. This should not be systems over students. It should be students over systems.
I really enjoyed when we got to talk with her. That was an episode from February, and that was when she was launching her podcast that you mentioned earlier. Yep. But that idea of students over systems, that we have to fund our students and we can't just lump money into systems that are failing our kids everywhere. Since then, we've talked to her again. She's in contact with me regularly. I really think she has a lot to offer our audience, specifically with what she's talking about.
We should probably bring her in.
I know. I think she'd be a great one to have in here, like in-house. I think people could learn a lot. I think she has a lot to share. She's passionate about it. It isn't necessarily just Christian education, but it really is about, if we have this system, let's fix it. And not everybody falls into that category, the guests that we've had on and talked about, but she's smart and she shares things in a way that I think is understandable for a lot of people. I get very tired when I hear people saying it's just too much I can't figure it all out. It's taxes, it's government. But she breaks it down, and she believes in the power of fixing things that are broken. And when it comes to funding, I think that's very important.
In 2023, it probably, there were two shows that always stood out to me in my mind in this past year, and this one was certainly one of them. I might be prepared to call this my favorite episode of the year. We've talked with a lot of remarkable people doing a lot of special and remarkable things, but I don't think there were many more remarkable than a sheriff's deputy in the Kansas City metro area out of Clay County, Missouri, a gentleman called Jonathan Bransfield. And those of you who listened to that episode, you already know the story. Those of you who didn't for some reason, you should go back and listen to it. This is a school resource officer during the day. And one evening, he gets a phone call in his home that one of the students in the school where he works during the day is threatening to jump to his death from a water tower. And before he jumps, the only person that he wants to talk to, not his parents, not anybody else, he wants to talk to this school resource officer who he counts on as a friend and trusts this guy, Sheriff's Deputy Bransfield. So he came in studio with us, and we had a long-form conversation about what this meant to him. He's a guy of tremendous faith, but he gives us real insights as to what he's seeing in public school and what a struggle it is for him to live out his faith as an officer in a public school, trying to witness, and you'll be better for hearing the conversation. Take a listen.
Anything that involves schools, we are there to
trying to
help.
have a presence.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But it's ultimately your relationship in this capacity that comes into play with this story. So please take it away.
So I actually I had gotten in bed, and I put a sleep mode on my phone so I don't get disrupted at night. And I'd only had that on for a few days, and my phone just kept going off. And it was my work phone. So I had a couple of Kansas City numbers that I did not know, and I usually do not answer phone calls that I don't know. So then I started getting calls from deputies. One of the really good buddies of mine that was working that night, I called him back. He said, "Hey, Kansas City's trying to get a hold of you. We need you to respond immediately." So he said to call the number back. So I called the number back, and it was the Kansas City Police Department captain that was on scene.
Wow.
And he said, "Hey, we've got a situation down here involving somebody that knows you and has asked you personally to respond down to the scene. Can you come?" And without any hesitation at all, I said, "Absolutely. Give me 25 minutes and I'll be there."
Did you recognize the name? Did they give you the name of the student?
He did. Just the first name, and I immediately knew.
You knew who it was?
I immediately knew who it was.
Did you know this kid is troubled?
Not to the point of where he took it.
Okay.
But I did know that he was having some struggles.
Okay.
And you knew that because he confided in you at school?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I made it a point, and him and I, it was kind of a running joke, was every morning that he would come in, he would see me in the hallway, give each other a high five, shake, give each other a hug, and say, "Hey, man, have a good day." And that's just kind of how our day went before he left. "Hey, man, hope you have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow."
And there's such value in that, because when you have a kid coming into the classroom or into a hallway or into the building, a lot of times I think any person that is in tune can see maybe not having the best day right now, or struggling. I think there's complete intent in that 100%
What
from
were
the
you
get-go.
thinking? You get the call that he wants to talk to you. Are youth, I mean, I don't know I guess you go into professional mode. You're not thinking about anything other than getting to the scene, I know, but are you having any kind of internal dialogue about what might be waiting for you?
I honestly, the first thing out of my mouth was, God, let me make it on time. Gosh. And if this is what I have to do, then give me the strength and give me the words in order to change an outcome.
And to be there on time, to be there before,
I made it there in pretty good time.
I'm glad.
he wanted you there. Did he tell you why, or did the officers tell you why?
So I got on scene, and the captain just kind of briefed me on what was going on. He said, you're welcome to go on scene. And there was a couple other officers there, and they let me know that they had negotiators en route. So I went, and I immediately put eyes on him and knew I needed to start building this dialogue now. But it wasn't hard because I had built this dialogue with him every day.
Is he on a ladder?
And where I was going to say, where was he?
He was actually on a very thin ring on a pole.
How high up?
He was I think what they said was he was approximately 115, 120 feet up.
And you're communicating with him how?
I was pretty much shouting, if not just trying to, and every time that I would say something, I was like, can you hear me?
Okay.
And he would respond.
Okay.
So I immediately got there, and as soon as he heard my voice, he was able to know that it was me. Mm-hmm. And he just wanted to tell me, hey, man, I just want to say thank you for everything you did for me, and I just want to tell you goodbye. And, I don't want you to see this. And I said, well, it's just like everything else that you've called on me this year, is that once you call on me, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere.
I will say, as we pulled episodes, and kind of did a lot of reflection, this was one of the hardest ones. Number one, to listen to emotionally. It was a great episode with a lot of information. It was also very hard to pull one specific piece that we thought would resonate well. There's so much, and even just the personal conversations that you and I had with him on the episode, off air as well. He shared about moving his own kids out of public school into a private school. He talked about recently having come to faith, how that propelled him as he had to handle this situation. And thank goodness, because had the outcome been different, I can't think of anything I'd have to lean into more than my faith. That's a precarious situation to put any police officer in, as we well know. There was so much that just couldn't be coincidental.
Yeah.
It was absolutely God moving through it. And I very much, I know there were police officers and their families listening to that episode who have not listened to a single other episode of what we've done, but that reached them. And I was really glad to hear that.
Yeah, he's excellence on multiple fronts. He's excellence in the education arena, really, as a school resource officer. He's excellence as a police officer, or I should say sheriff's deputy, and he's an excellent committed Christian. He unapologetically so. Mm-hmm. So, and happy note, by the way, we keep in touch with him from time to time. He's now engaged to be married, I believe. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting follow-up.
Yeah, it's really neat. So I would encourage people going back to listen to that one, because I think, again, listening for the voices that, for those God moments to tell you what to do when it comes to not just your kids, but other kids around you. That's powerful.
And no matter where you are, to be fearless and unapologetic and unafraid to share your witness, because you don't know how that might impact someone, and ultimately, in his case, saved a life potentially. So, that's just the start of some of the clips we enjoyed in 2023. Next week, we're going to highlight more clips that we enjoyed in 2023. We've had some great guests this year.
I think great guests, and we couldn't include them all. Yeah, that's what was so hard. I mean, we've talked to Riley Gaines. They're people that as I began this process with you of the selection, and I thought, how do I even narrow it down? So if this is even intriguing to you, even we'll reflect on episodes next week as well, but so many that we just couldn't include, that aren't mentioned. Carrie Ingraham was another one that I would encourage people. We've had her on twice now.
Riley Gaines, who, as you listen to this,
what's going on?
Just a few weeks ago, she was testifying before Congress again. Mm-hmm. She's become amazing in the movement of protecting women's sports.
And she's young. That again, she was. Now I'm like, I probably should have put that episode in. But she's young, and that's something that we consistently talk about, is working for this next generation. Yep. She's just about the same age as our oldest, a little bit older, obviously. But there's so much untapped power, I think, in a lot of people that maybe don't have a platform like she does, but she's encouraging and inspiring for someone to go back and listen to.
So that'll do it for this half of our highlights of 2023. Tune in next week for the second batch of our favorite moments of Making the Leap in 2023.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. Please rate and comment on the show, as well as subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'll see you next time on Making the Leap.